of checking our lives, of saying, is there anything in our lives right now that aren't in harmony with the Scriptures? Is there anything right now that is out of line with what God has called us to live? And he says, if so, be reconciled to God. Come on back. He's writing this, and it's so tempting for us to say today, all right, when you leave these doors, you enter the mission field and go out there and share the great, share the gospel, Great Commission, go. And I'm all for that. The Scriptures call us to it. But you cannot go as an ambassador if you don't know the King. You can't go and talk about heaven if you haven't glimpsed it. You can't. You go and you don't even know what you're talking about. And this isn't an insult like, you're dumb, you don't know what you're talking about. That's not what I'm telling you. But I'm just telling you, don't put the cart before the horse. The temptation today is to go and talk about reconciliation with someone, and you're not living reconciled to God. I tell students all the time, if you're going to go out there and live a life that looks nothing like a Christian, please don't tell people you're a Christian. Please don't wear the cheesy shirt. Please don't wear the necklace. Please. You're killing me here. You're damaging my witness. I'm trying to go out there and talk about being reconciled, and you're living in harmony with the world. People don't come to know Christ when people go out and try to share the gospel because they were told to, and they're not reconciled to God. You know why? Because the world sees them and says there's nothing different. Why do I need to wake up early on Sunday? What's the point? There's nothing different about that person than me. That's why Paul says, hey, you should go. This is the message. You're ambassadors. But before, make sure you've been reconciled to God. And then he says, well, let me just make it clear again. Let me tell you what it's all about. Let me just tell you what it's all about. And it's one of my favorite verses in all the Bible. He says, for God made him, he's referring to Jesus, God made him, Jesus, who had no sin. Jesus was perfect. Him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Paul has done this gospel deal where he's explained what the gospel is earlier in verses 11 to 16, and then he's talked about the implications on their lives, and then he ends and he says, don't forget the gospel. The temptation today is that if I came up and I said, today I just want to preach about the gospel, the temptation is we'd say, give me something new. And Paul constantly says, don't forget the gospel. It is simple yet complex. It is unbelievably deep. This little verse blows my mind. He says, him who had no sin, he made him sin for us that we might become the righteousness of God. Do you understand the exchange that's happening right there? That we're literally looking at a moment where Jesus becomes all of our sin. Let's be honest. In that picture that I put up alone, there is a lot of sin in that picture, right? And we're tempted to rank sin and score sin and all that stuff. There's a lot of sin in that picture. There's a lot of sin in this room. Right? Now think about this. Jesus, the gospel message in 2 Corinthians 5:21 is simple. That Jesus became sin. All sin. Not just the sin in this room, the sin in every church is gathering right now. The all sin of the world, past, present, future. Jesus becomes all of that sin so that we might become the righteousness of God. What an unbelievable exchange. That Jesus would become it. I personally, when I look at the Scriptures and we see, when Jesus is on the cross, we see a really unique moment. Jesus is on the cross, he says, my God, why? Jesus is on the cross, he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? You remember that part? He's crying out and he feels like he's alone. I honestly believe this with all my heart. I think one of the reasons Jesus feels so alone is he's become sin. What does sin do? Sin separates us. Sin leaves you feeling all alone. Jesus became sin. God and sin don't hang out together. That Jesus on the cross becomes sin for all of us. And in that moment, he bears the weight of sin, the conviction of sin, the loneliness of sin. In an instant on the cross, he became all the sin of the world. Jesus, who knew no sin, became all of your sin. All your past sin, all your sin in your life right now, all the sin that'll come in the weeks ahead. That you and I could become the righteousness of God. That is an amazing message that we have the opportunity to be ambassadors for. I would challenge you today, though, that if you haven't been reconciled, you're going to bring a message that just is confusing and it doesn't line up with your life. So before you leave here and you take a message anywhere, I think you should just examine your lives. We do it every week. We get together and we take communion. And what do we know from 1 Corinthians? You examine your life. What does communion do every week? We come and we examine our lives and we remember that Jesus became sin on our behalf, that we might become the righteousness of God. We have a chance every week to come and to check our lives and ask, are we living lives that are reconciled? We have a chance every week to come and to remember the gospel. I didn't grow up in church. I didn't grow up in a Christian church. I didn't grow up in church at all. And so when I started going to Crossbridge, the Christian church I attend in Tallahassee, they told me we take communion every week. And I got to be honest. My first thought was, well, that's going to get old. And you're saying, like, we do it every week. And if you have friends that go to other churches, a lot of times they're going to say, well, doesn't that just become a routine? And I always want to be like, hey, well, why do you sing to God every week? Like, does that become a routine? I mean, I don't want to get sassy, but I try not to. But let's really think about this. Like, this is the chance every week to renew the gospel, to never forget the gospel. The scriptures always say, in view of God's mercy, because of the gospel. And then in Corinthians, he says, let the love of Christ compel us. What drives us is the gospel. And you and I get the chance in this church every week to remember the gospel, to never forget it. Let's put the picture back up, and I'll wrap up real quick. And then we'll take communion together. In this picture, I want to highlight a couple of these people. Julie is my gossip friend. She'd kill me. Don't tell her I said that. She is my friend. She was already a Christian, had never been baptized, had never heard about baptism, and decided to get baptized. We were standing in front of Westcott Fountain, which is like the postcard moment at FSU. Two great things happen at Westcott. For your birthday, you get thrown in, and you get baptized there. The FSU doesn't know that, but the second one counts too. And so that's where we do all of our baptisms at. Caitlin was just the sweetheart of a girl. She still is, like, incredibly sweet. But she knew she needed a Savior. And her righteousness, the scripture says, is as filthy rags in comparison to God's holiness. Angel is the guy in the pink towel. That Angel, he was one in the openly gay relationship. And he came to CCF and he said for the first time ever, he saw that these people knew that God existed and they lived their lives accountable to him. He disappeared for a year because he couldn't handle it. If there was a God and he built his life on the fact there wasn't a God, then he was going to have to answer to him. A year later, he came back and he said, what do you think I should do? And I was like, well, good question. And between me and a lot of the other CCFers actually doing an incredible job of loving Angel and sharing the gospel with him. Angel came to know Christ on March 7th last year. And he got baptized there at Westcott Fountain. I'll do two more people in this picture. The guy in the beanie, I don't know why he's wearing a beanie. It's like it's April, and he's wearing a beanie. It's Josh. That's what he does. Josh is actually a teak. He's in the frat. He is the boy who lived the college life at the fullest. Met him playing Frisbee, didn't see him for 2 years after that, and he emailed me one day, and he said, hey, I'm miserable. I know how to get myself to miserable, and I don't know how to get myself out. He said, you're the only Christian I remember meeting, and we meet up. We met up on a Thursday. That was Easter Sunday. He emailed me. We met up on Thursday. He had read Genesis and Exodus, and I was like, no, stop, Leviticus next. And so we met, and that's exactly what I told him. And I said, where does Jesus fit in this? And he said, I don't know. I'll tell you when I get the New Testament. And I said, oh, no, let's read the New Testament first. Josh accepted Christ later that week, got baptized. He leads a Bible study at his frat now on Luke. His brothers are like, why don't you get high with us and drunk with us and sleep with girls with us like you used to? He says, I'll tell you why. We can study it every week. He's preaching tonight his second ever sermon, thinks he's called the full-time ministry. And then the kid that faked church and did it well and was this hypocritical leader is me. I did it well. I faked it. I could have had all the life in the world that looks like fruit, but I promise you it wasn't. I was not reconciled to God. I was at a conference on leadership because my church sent me because I was a leader. There was no altar call. And God turned me upside down, and he said, if you're a leader, where are you leading your people to? And I was like, I know the answer. And I sure as heck, no pun intended, don't want to take it in there with me. I accepted Christ at a conference. I came back. I got connected to CCF. Mike Ware's poured into my life. He said, hey, I think you need to intern. I said, okay. Didn't want to go into ministry. Thought it sounded miserable. And he went to leave, and he said, I think you should take my job. And I would try to be spiritual. I'll pray about it. So I did, and I knew that's what I should do. The faces that you see in this picture are the faces